Not only is Castlevania Symphony of the Night a masterpiece of video game design, it's teeming with references to history, religion, literature, and folklore. This is the Annotated Symphony of the Night. Welcome to the Abandoned Mine, which is one of the shortest confined areas of the game. In the Japanese version, this area is known as the Abandoned Pit to the Catacomb, which makes a bit more sense because the background doesn't suggest that this location is very mine-like. Regardless, it leads us downward into the lowest reach of the castle. While perhaps not a direct reference, this entranceway is reminiscent of the entrance to the final level of the first Castlevania for the NES. It's appropriately ominous for what we'll encounter next. This level is unique in that it front-loads us with a boss battle before granting us the opportunity to explore the rest of it. The Cerberus here, misspelled Cerberus in the North American version, isn't much of a threat though. It's weak to ice attacks and has a problem withstanding the onslaught of holy water from up above. It's a recurring series boss that first appeared in Bloodlines for the Sega Genesis, but snuck its way into Dracula X for the Super NES shortly thereafter. It's one of the more famous monsters derived from Greek myth, and is often depicted as a dog with multiple heads and a serpent tail, but its exact appearance changes depending on the writer. Cerberus served as the watchdog for the Greek Underworld, but also appeared in other avenues such as Dante's Inferno, or Virgil encountered it within the Third Circle of Hell. It was also one of the labors of Heracles, as the Greek hero needed to capture it to prove his godhood. This enemy is known as the Salem Witch here, but Aluremnes in other territories. These are recurring characters in Norse mythology, otherwise known as the Volva. They were female shamans and seers to ancient Germanic tribes, with the goddess Freya being perhaps the most famous of them. A Salem Witch, however, is a reference to a spate of wrongful executions that had taken place in Massachusetts in the late 1600s, where 20 people were accused of witchcraft and later killed, either by hanging or in prison, including 2 infant children. Over time, it's come to be known as a substantial cautionary tale in American politics and its legal system as the primary example of theocratic mass hysteria overtaking due process to terrible effect. The witches here drop shortcake in a gold circlet that raises intelligence by +6 and will heal Alucard of holy damage if inflicted. This annoying little enemy is the gremlin known as the Ukobak in both the Japanese version and further games in which it appears. It floats around and does nothing but leave small fires, which figures into its history as a lesser demon that keeps the fires of hell lit, according to Jacques-Colin de Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal. In fact, its design in the game is based primarily on an illustration of the little creep in the 1863 edition of the book by Louis Le Breton. It's also a servant of the greater demon Beelzebub, which will come up again much later. A gremlin is a relatively new term for a small mischievous creature from various folklores like sprites and brownies. They became popularized in the early 20th century when British pilots claimed that their planes were being sabotaged by them, and the idea of little green men breaking down machines proliferated. Famous author Roald Dahl, himself part of the RAF, originally wrote a children's book depicting them that made its way to the Disney studios, but various projects to adapt it never materialized. The most famous gremlin of Western audiences, then, are the ones that you don't feed after midnight. Anyway, they drop a resist fire consumable and the fire mail armor that boosts defense by +4 and is strong against fire-based attacks. Here's our third familiar, the demon, or devil. It flies on its own and stabs enemies with various elemental attacks that become more robust as it gains experience levels. It also becomes more aggressive as it becomes stronger as well, and players that use the demon familiar often need to significantly train it with levels for it to become a worthwhile companion. The demon familiar's one unique attribute outside of combat happens to be its curiosity.
A switch. Why don't I press it and see?
This monster is the Venus Weed, so named because a naked woman blooms from within, similarly to depictions of the goddess Venus. Her name in the Japanese version, though, is Allura Une, which makes her the older sibling of the smaller Une, or thornweed enemies that we found earlier in the game and in this same cave. The name, though, is a clever and complex play on words. Allura Une is derived from the word Alrauna, which is the German term for mandrake. Mandrakes, or mandragora, are actual plants that have both toxic and hallucinogenic properties, and the roots have oddly humanoid shapes to them, which many believe to have led to their use in a variety of superstitions over the centuries. A myth about them that sprang in the Middle Ages about their origins, and that the semen or blood of hanged men crept into the soil beneath their dead bodies and formed mandrake plants. A German novel published in 1911 called Alrauna revised the legend as something of a cautionary tale against the prospect of artificial insemination when a genetics professor impregnates a prostitute in a laboratory. The products of both a witch that, quote, makes love with a mandrake plant from the legend and the prostitute in the book is a child with neither a soul nor the emotion or feelings of love, which are totally counter to a plant named after Venus, whom is the embodiment of love and sexuality in Greco-Roman myth. That's a little Byzantine, but there's a lot in a name, I suppose. The actual enemy only has 100 hit points and be killed from a distance before it blooms, but is repellent to blunt damage until it flowers. It then strengthens to 500 hit points, and its petals grow redder as Alucard inflicts slashing damage. It will drop a coral circlet that boosts intelligence by +7, and will render Alucard immune to curse status. It also drops the very interesting Heart Refresh item. This will instantly replenish 500 hearts for sub-weapon use, but has the spectacular side effect of totally destroying the fabric of the game. Along with the duplicator accessory, glitch-hunting players often use the Heart Refresh to pass through walls and access unused and unfinished content, as we saw in the first videos of this series when Alucard entered the beginning of the never-completed underground garden. Fitting in its way that this item dropped by a powerful plant is the one that would have led us there. And speaking of Venus, or rather her original Greek incarnation as Aphrodite, we have an item named after her man on the side, Ares, whom is the Greek god of war. The Japanese version, though, names this the Lauren's Ring, which bears a thematic connection to the enemies that we fought through to get here. Lauren is a treacherous king of dwarves that resided within a crystal palace inside of a mountain range. The entrance to the kingdom was a spectacular rose garden that Lauren, though, was very protective of. Versions of the story differ, but epic poems that depict the fantastical adventures of Dietrich of Bern display Lauren as having the ability to turn invisible in order to protect his kingdom, the princess that he had abducted and then married, and the rose garden. The item in Symphony has the curious effect of boosting offense by +24, which is evidently the strength of 24 men, according to its in-game description, at the cost of dropping defense by the same amount. These peanuts are an odd little touch within the game. The in-game description notes that they're difficult to eat, which is true actually. When used, the peanuts are tossed in the air and the player must hold up on the control pad to catch them in Alucard's mouth. Kind of a lot of effort for 50 hit points. This is the Power of Sire, or Power of Father in the Japanese version. This is the most powerful bomb weapon in the game, which makes sense given its rarity. It's only found here and in one other location later on. The small icon seen in the inventory screen depicts Count Dracula as he's shown in the game, with his glowing red eye and long gray mane of hair. Upon using it, though, we see a flash of Vlad Tepes on screen. Its strength is in its multiple hits as it continuously attacks during the flashing animation. Contrary to the Power of Sire, the Karma Coin is the least reliable bomb found in Symphony. It's literally a coin toss, as landing on one side will cause a soul steal on all enemies on screen, while another will make a bolt of lightning strike the coin for brief, on-the-spot damage. The combat knife here is one of the stronger knife weapons in the game in that it attacks in 2 successive strikes. A sonic boom motion will affect a basic slash. This takes us to both the end of this section and the end of the episode. Not a very large area, sure, but we had a lot to talk about regardless. Join us next time as we dig through the bottommost part of the castle and fight a grotesque biblical evil. See you then.